Welcome to the Better Business, Better Life show. I'm your podcast host, Debra Chantry-Taylor. In this podcast, I interview business owners, EOS implementers, and business experts who share with you their experiences, tips, and tools to help you create not only a better business, but also a better life. At the end of each show, you will have 3 tips or tools that our guests share that you can implement immediately into your life. If you want more information or want to get in contact, you can visit my website, debra.coach. That's Debra.coach. Please enjoy the show. Today, I am joined by Dai Manuel, who's from Vancouver over in Canada. And when I asked what I should introduce him as, he said, I don't like titles. And I went, yep, I'm with you. So this is just the guy from Vancouver. You'll find out a whole lot more about him on the podcast. We've had a great little chat beforehand, and I'm really looking forward to sharing, for him sharing his story, because there's some really fascinating stuff in there. Welcome to the show, Dai.
Thank you, Debra. I'm just honored to be here. It's exciting. I loved our preamble before we hit go, and
Yep.
I just feel like we're from the same cloth. Just a lot of similar beliefs, similar journeys and stories. Or at least lessons that we've learned. So I'm excited to have this conversation today. This is great.
Yeah, me too. Hey, look, we were just talking about your journey. I mean, I know you've done a lot in your years so far, but could you just give us a little bit of a potted history of your journey to where you are now, some of the challenges you kind of faced on the way, and I guess what you're most proud of as well, so from a professional and personal point of view?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll go way back. I'm 46, staring down the barrel at 47 right now. So it's coming this fall. But, if I go way back, those that know me, or when they learn about me, they instantly believe that I'm someone that's been around health and wellness my entire life. People, the adage, the cliche, you judge a book by its cover, right? So people meet me, they see how my actions are and how I live my life, and they just presume, man, it must have always been like this. You know how you meet fitness people and we're like, yeah, you've probably always been fit. You don't know what it's like to be unhealty. And
I'm going to be honest. When I looked at your profile and I saw your photo, I thought, what does this guy know about being unhealthy? I mean, come on. So I'm guilty of exactly the same. And it's only when I chatted to you, it's like, okay, a different story.
and I get that. I totally appreciate that. And listen, when I was a kid, age 9, my parents separated and divorced. And, I'm an 80s kid. I was born in the mid 70s. So I grew up during those influential years and impactful years in the 80s. And back then, the divorce rates that we're used to today, statistically speaking, over half marriages end in divorce now, where back then there was a lot of stigma around divorce. So being as such, there wasn't a lot of conversations to be had. There was not a lot of support and resources to be there to help my brother and I, and as well as my parents, just navigate this thing, and they did the best they could. Right. They did the best they could. And, my dad left and my mom looked after my brother and I, but she had to work more to support us. And my dad was still supporting us too. But it was just, we had a lot of autonomy. And with this autonomy, this time by ourselves, I was dealing with a lot of emotions. And I mean, I'm like barely 10 years old. I mean, what am I supposed to be doing with all this stuff and these questions? And I figured out really quickly that I can influence my emotions based on certain things that I do, and especially certain things that I eat. And so I played video games, I watched movies, and I also learned to eat certain types of foods. And it wasn't like I was there, Debra, saying, hey, Debra, more salad, please. Yeah, none of that. It was eating very nutrition poor food, yet very high in calories. And, we understand the math on this one. We don't have to be someone that's in the fitness or wellness industry to tell us, but 5 years of that being my regular normal. By the time I hit age 15, I very distinctly remember the day my mom took me to the doctor's office, and Dr. Quinn pulls my mom aside and is like, Betty Ann, Dai is morbidly obese. And my BMI was well into the 40s. And for those that are familiar with body mass index and how that works, like, as a teenage boy that was barely 15 years old with a BMI well into the 40s, I was a very large kid. And it wasn't by accident. It's not like I had one poor meal and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I got a weight problem. It was a compound effect over years. And, along with all those emotions that I learned to eat really well, I I dealt with a lot of mental health challenges as a result, because there was bullying at school. I was antisocial. Like I was very introverted because I felt every time I was around people, I was being judged. Or if I saw people smiling or snickering, instantly I thought it was about me, and it was really hard. It was just hard. Okay. And I can empathize with others that might be dealing with this right now. I mean, I'm just grateful that we didn't have social media back then, like I can't imagine kids today. Like,
Nah.
wow. And, at age 15, I had this moment, and it's all I can say is it's this instant moment where I just made a decision after staring at myself in the mirror and feeling so disconnected with the person looking back at me. Like, that's just not me. That's not who I believe I am. And I don't want to be that. That's not my reality. As well as I was afraid of the idea if I didn't make any changes right then and there, things weren't going to be any better 5 years from then. So at 15, thinking about by the time I'm 20 and I'm going to university, because we were having those conversations, what do I want to do with my life? And I'm like, well, geez, I don't want to be like this. And I made a decision. I was like, I just want to get healthy. Now, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how to do it. But I knew in me, I did not want to feel the way I was feeling anymore. And fortunately for me, my parents, they were very supportive, went out. I said, hey, I'd like to go get a bike. Can we get me a bike? Because I remember when I was a kid, I used to love riding my bike. Can I go get a bike? I knew I liked that activity. And my dad's like, yeah, let's go. And we literally went that afternoon. I shared, I want to get healthy. He's like, okay, what can I do to help? This, great. We went and they took immediate action. And I'm so forever grateful for them doing that. And I just started to move my body every day, just a little bit. It was really hard, but I did it a little bit every day. And it started to make me feel better, think a little bit differently. And then I started to educate myself on nutrition. And it took me 5 years to put all the weight on, but it took me 20 months to take it all off.
Wow.
And so by 17, Debra, I had this just whole new outlook on life and on myself. Yet there was still some emotional trauma there that I had never dealt with. And a lot of people say, well, hey, I understand your intrinsic motivation there, but what was the extrinsic? What was driving you outside of yourself? And I was like, well, I actually wanted a girlfriend. I did, full disclosure. I after unpacking that, I realized it was just because I wanted somebody to want me. I wanted to feel wanted. And, that was something that I sort of carried with me. And so, once I got into my early 20s or late teens, early 20s, I realized I was still very introverted, still dealing with a lot of self-esteem issues. Didn't matter how I was changing on the outside. On the inside, I still felt like that morbidly obese teenager, isolated, withdrawn, and dealing with a lot of other mental health challenges. And it was weird, but I remember going to a party and being offered a beer. And I remember having a couple. And all of a sudden, it was like all those inhibitions and those little thoughts that I had, they just seemed to go out the window. And all of a sudden, I found myself talking to people and being outgoing and energetic and being invited to go to other parties. And all of a sudden, I started to believe that that person that I was when I was drinking was the one that people wanted to be around. Now moving into my 20s, I got into business, selling fitness equipment, very quickly excelled at that, got into a partnership arrangement with a mentor of mine. 17 years, we scaled the practice to 8 figures a year, and really was omnichannel. So it was online retail, it was manufacturing overseas, it was wholesale, and then 8 retail locations as well. And I learned a lot doing that, and I loved it. I loved it.
How many staff did you have in that business?
Well, when you think about consultants and contractors and immediate full-time, part-time, it was during high season, about 120 to 130, and then lower season, usually in around the 80 to 90. Because there is a seasonality to, especially the fitness equipment. It's like basically the fall and winter very busy, spring and summer less busy. So
we all kind of look at the bikini in the cupboard and go,
well,
how am I going to fit into that this
January is crazy, But it was great. But at the same time, while I'm scaling this business, I remember meeting my wife. I remember having my kids, and really living into my ego, wanting to be that guy. Like the identity was so tied to this idea of what I thought success was. And I thought it was monetary. I thought it was title. I thought it was just people looking at me and thinking, wow, he's got it all together. Like it was just very surface. And I was very good at putting up those filters, and my drinking was getting worse and worse. Like it was just more and more regular. And I found myself compromising my values quite frequently, being able to sort of reason my way out of doing things that I normally, or reasoning to do things that I normally wouldn't do. Like turning my phone off, as an example, being at the pub with the friends, purposely turning my phone off to say, "Oh, sorry, babe, I didn't know you called. Oh, my phone died. Sorry." Like just stuff like that, my wife, my best friend, the mother of my children. And here I am lying to her.
Being a bit of a dick, if we're honest.
Yes, thank you. Very much so. A very big one, and it was tough, because that also creates a lot of internal strife for us. When we have certain values that we espouse all the time to others, and yet we don't show up like that for others, especially for ourselves, that accountability or agency, it creates this little void. And we often do things to either distract ourselves from that void or fill it. And it's not usually healthy stuff, and so I found myself drinking, occasionally doing narcotics. I was even promiscuous. I cheated on my wife. I am not proud, still feel a little bit of shame around that. We've worked through it. I mean, this is now, 15 years removed, but at that time in my early 30s, things are really crazy. And yet the business is still blowing up.
Does it?
It was like crazy.
Yeah, it's still doing really well. Yeah. And do you find that it kind of creeps up on you? Because we were talking about this before we came on the podcast, right? I mean, I think that my husband and I are just taking a bit of a break from alcohol at the moment, because we actually realised that sort of literally every day when we came home, it was the first thing we kind of reached for. And then the one glass became two, became three, became four. Before you know, it's a bottle a night. And for him, it's more beer. So, it's the same with you. I mean, because and to be fair, sharing really vulnerably, I've done narcotics in the past too, and it's I think a lot of us may have actually been there, and I think when you've got a high stress business, you can often kind of turn to other things. But did it creep up, or was it how did it manifest itself?
It was okay, there's a couple things here. So one was, I was purposely doing it at home, so like I would often open the bottle of wine or have a beer or two or three, half sack by the time I get home at night, and justify that my day was tough. I'd been talking and engaging with people and just running the business. So this is my way of decompressing, resetting, like all sorts of stuff. I could justify it many, many ways. But I also found it was my association, personally and professionally, that also fed into it. And what I mean by that was, a lot of the personal association I had, it was always revolving around alcohol and being social with alcohol always present, always. Yeah. And so it was this social norm, and it was, everybody was doing it. It wasn't like I had any examples or models of people that were doing it differently in my immediate circle. And so I was just doing what everybody else was doing and not thinking anything of it. And professionally, it was interesting. Here I am in the fitness and wellness industries. Yeah. And
that's what I was thinking. I mean, and that your friends were also potentially in that industry too?
Yeah. And I remember going to conferences and trade shows, and it was crazy how unhealthy these people are. And I mean, I'm one of them. Hey, listen, like I was one of them. Okay. I was one of them. And I remember, like, we would do business on the conference room floor, right? We're doing our buys for the next year or something like that. And it's like, okay, we ink the deal, sign off. And then it's like, okay, where are we partying tonight? And it was just like this, it was just normal. That was what we did. And it just became such a big part of my life, that it was always present. And when I started to really recognize that, I would often take, even staff out reward them for a great month. We hit some targets, or maybe take some guys out for a lunch here and there. I would be the one encouraging to get a round of drinks. I'd also be the one that would be like, hey, don't worry, I'm here treating, let's get another round. And I would do that, basically making sure everybody else got another drink, only so I could get my own and not feel so guilty about it. So I started to see these patterns, these little kinks in the armor were showing up, and that was pretty apparent. But it's amazing how we got to sometimes get to that moment where we feel like we're rock bottom. And then you realize, well, actually, I can pick the rock up and I can crawl under it, and I that's really where I got to, and it was this fateful day getting home, and my wife's looking at me, she woken me up because I passed out on the floor beside her bed the night before. I don't remember how I got home. It's like 11 a.m. the next morning, and she's downstairs unloading the dishwasher with extreme passion, Like, waking up everybody in
Good
the
on her.
cul-de-sac. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I know what she was doing. She was doing it to make me wake up. And I got up, I came down, and she's looking at me like she's never looked at me before. At this period in her life, we'd been together for 10 years. And she just had this look. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's something
I'm in
really
trouble.
wrong here. And motioned me to the table. We sat down, and one of the first things out of her mouth was like, we have to talk about what we're going to do about the kids. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, this isn't an environment I'm willing to raise them in anymore. Let's talk about what it's going to be like to co-parent our kids. Let's talk about where you're going to be living. And I'm like, whoa, what? Like, yeah. And it was like this instant, like, what is going on here? And I'm really hungover at the time too, which doesn't make anything better. But, it was just like this bomb was dropped on me. But, truth be told, it wasn't like it was a surprise. I knew it was coming. I mean, eventually, like, she's a very strong-willed woman. She's a redhead, tinge of ginge all the way. And she's fiery, right? She's going to tell you the way it is. And that's why I love her. That's why I love her.
Yeah.
And she asked me a question, Deborah. And in this conversation, we sat at that table for a couple hours, and there was tears being shed both directions. And we both love each other still very much at that moment, but she was not loving the situation, and she wasn't loving how I was showing up regularly. And she asked me, Dai, are you being the type of man you would want to marry your daughters?
Whoa. Yep.
It was one of the most, pardon the pun, but sobering questions I could have ever been asked. It was in that instance I realized, well, I mean, if you think about it, Deborah, because I know you can speak to this really well, how do we all learn as human beings? Well, we learn through role modeling and through mentorship. Those are really the two primary ways that we learn. And, when she asked me that question, I started thinking, well, what am I modeling to people? My kids, my family, my friends, my communities, my employees, my business partner, like, what am I modeling? And how am I mentoring people? And I realized, like, man, if somebody like me showed up on my doorstep, there's no way they're coming in. Like, no way, as that guy that I was. And yet that's what I was saying to my kids as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a brother, as a business owner. And it was right in that moment, similar to how you and your husband are taking a break, I decided and I committed to taking 1 year without drinking. And I know there's going to be people like, 1 year, it sounds like you were an alcoholic. And it was like, no, I was fully conscious of my decisions every day. I chose to mute my phone or turn it off. I chose to get another round. I was aware of every decision I made. I never really felt out of control unless I purposely got myself out of control, and so I'm fully conscious. The alcohol wasn't making me drink it. I wasn't powerless against it. I was knowing what I was doing. And yet I kept saying yes to alcohol and saying no to my life and everything that I'd been working so hard for. And literally in that instance, I decided to take 1 year off. And in the first 3 months, Deborah, I realized, oh my gosh, what have I done? This is hard. It was hard.
Yep.
And back then I wasn't a very vulnerable person because, again, all my circles of influence, nobody was vulnerable. All the guys were like very, we're men. We don't talk about that stuff. Like, it was just rough and gruff and grit, and you work hard. You talk about business all the time. You talk about life very superficially, but it's all about just that. And so that wasn't being modeled. So I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I didn't know how to ask for help. And 3 months in, I did a big verbal dump on my wife. It was the first time in our 10 years together that I told her exactly how I was feeling and everything I was struggling with. Like, I'd never done that before with anybody, to be honest. And she's looking at me, and thank goodness, she was very kind. She looked at me. She heard me. She was very present with me sharing. Didn't interrupt me. Let me just get it all out. And she looks at me. She says, well, thank you. It's going to be okay. And I think you should talk to somebody, so it was like, oh, okay. It's that's where we're going. Cause it's true. I know, she can't be all that for me. She can't help me with that. And up to that point in time, I'd never thought about it. I always thought that would be a weakness to go get mental health support, go see a mental health professional, a psychiatrist. No, I don't do that. I don't need that. I'm not crazy. Like that was what I was thinking. Right. And my belief system. And, I started working with a psychologist for 6 months, a therapist, which was a relationship therapist for my wife and I. And one session in, she's like, Christy, I think Dai should come back by himself. So it was this is full disclosure. I got no problem sharing this story now because again, I'm coming on. It's been a long time removed, but it was such a critical moment in my life. And this is the long-winded answer to your question. My personal and professional, the thing I'm most proud of was making that 1 year decision, a decision to go 1 year without alcohol. Because at the end of that year, my wife's looking at me and she's like, "Oh, Dai, you did it." And I'm like looking at her and I'm like, "I did do it." I'm like, "Holy smokes." And she's like, "Well, why don't tonight we share a glass of wine and watch the sunset?" And I'm like, "Wow, that sounds really nice." But then I was like, Christy, so much has happened in 1 year. Like so much had changed. So much. Like not only my health, my energy, how I was showing up at work, how I was leading our company and our teams, the feedback I was getting, even suppliers, and even my personal passion projects because all of a sudden I had all this energy and extra resources. I started doing things that I'd always wanted to do, but never done, like Toastmasters. And I had a couple other networking organizations that I started to participate in. And all of a sudden I was just feeling fulfillment from all these different ways. And I was like, you know what? So many things have changed in 1 year. What do you think would happen if I just kept going? I'm coming up on 14 years now since I last had a drink, and I have no qualms that I could pick up a drink and I wouldn't have any problems with it, but it's just not part of my life anymore. And I just don't feel I need it, it's just like, I'm good. And, and that was honestly the thing I'm most proud of, was being able to now look at my wife. And when she asked me that question, "Are you being that kind of man that you want to marry your daughters?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, I am. Hell yeah." and that's really where things sort of stand now, because everything changed. After I went through that big change, I realized that the path I was on professionally wasn't fulfilling anymore because I changed so much.
Yep.
I ultimately left that career after 17 years, and just have been pursuing other things ever since.
Fantastic. Hey, look, thank you so much for sharing, particularly so vulnerably. I have to say, I think your wife sounds like an amazing woman, and I'm really pleased that that you guys are still together, because she's obviously very good for you, and you're probably good for each other. So well done.
Thank you.
Okay, so that is, I think I would think a lot of people listening can probably relate to this. I think that even just in a couple of weeks of taking off from alcohol, I've just found that I've got a lot more clarity of thought. It does sort of, you have more time as well, because you're not sitting down. I'm not so much an outgoing person in terms of going out to the pub, but we would sit at home, we would drink, and the evening would be drinking, sitting in front of TV, eating. That was kind of it. Whereas now we've actually got time to do other things. I think that the environment thing's really fascinating because, of course, in a lot of business situations, it's not just the gym industry, but a lot of our networking events are based around alcohol. And I was really, really relieved when I went. I do a talk every year at university, and I actually talk to the students, and I talk to the science and technology, the STEM part of the business, because that's my background. And I talked to them about networking, and I went to this networking event to talk about networking with them, and they had no alcohol. And I was like, wow, this is actually pretty cool, because back in the day when I was at university, I'm a little bit older than you, everything was based around alcohol. So it was actually really good to see they served healthy food, they had no alcohol, and they were encouraging that kind of healthy way of life, which I think is really great.
That's wonderful. So cool. I wish more people would adopt that.
So it is tough though, isn't it, when you've got those industry things that you're getting together with, and that's the expectation. I actually got to the point where I used to actually, because I run an actual connector community where we all get together once a month, and we have some education, we have some networking, we have some strategy stuff, and then we have the drinks and nibbles afterwards. And I got to the point where I now take a bottle of 0 alcohol wine with me, and I give it to the barman, and I say, when I come over for a drink, just pour me this one. So it feels like I've still got a glass of wine in my hand. It looks like I've still got a glass of wine in my hand, but I'm not actually drinking alcohol.
I love that. That's a wonderful strategy. And I think everyone should take note of that, because I was similar. I had sort of moved to just having bubbly water or club soda with lime in it. And often, people look at that, it could be a gin and tonic for all they know, it's just, it's simple enough. And it's weird, right? Like, I think, if we're talking about sort of this social norm aspect of just how do we interact with others when they've made this kind of decision, I find early on, especially, this is going over a decade ago, when I would share with people, no, I don't drink, or I'm not, I would say no. Everybody else is ordering alcohol, I'd order something else. Instantly, people would presume, okay, why don't you drink? Like instantly to them, it's like, oh, I wonder if he's got a drinking problem. Like it was just like, it
Yeah.
was just so quick for people to judge. Where now I am finding that more and more people are just choosing to have a lifestyle where they're prioritizing health. And that just doesn't fit in the equation right now. I'm not to say
Yeah.
it's a never thing. I'm not here to vilify alcohol. I'm not here to say it's a
No.
bad thing and don't do it. That's not my purpose. But my purpose is to say, like, hey, if there's certain areas in your life that aren't measuring up to what you like them to
Mm.
be, you got to start
Yeah.
looking at certain things that might be holding you back from being optimal,
Yeah.
mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and also financially. What's holding you
Yeah.
back from being optimal in those areas? And chances
Mm.
are things like alcohol might be holding you back a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So take a
And I
pause.
think
Just
going
take a
back,
pause, like what you're doing, Deborah. I think you're being
yeah.
a wonderful example for people of what's possible. It's just taking a pause.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, it's about just knowing that it isn't a habit,
Yeah.
and that it's actually something I can choose to do or choose not to do. That's really important. Going back to your original story, I think also
Mm.
you talked about you as a 15-year-old, and I think sometimes I call it the spiral of doom. Like when we get into a bad place in our business,
Mm.
we just keep kind of spiraling downwards, and things get worse across all of our areas of our life. I mean, I've personally been there where the business isn't going well, and so then you start to
Mm.
drink a bit more, and then you sort of start to do a whole lot of things, and it feels like it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And
Yeah.
sometimes it can be hard to kind of pick yourself up and make a decision to move forward. I love that when you were a 15-year-old, you basically went, okay, I need to do something. There's no point in kind of pretending that as a morbidly obese 15-year-old that you can suddenly become a gym bunny overnight. But you went, okay, what do I like and what can I do? What's the sort of the tiny
Yes.
little step I can take towards it? And getting a bike and going, yeah, I like bike riding. I can start to move on the bike. You don't have to become a Tour de France winner in the first week of doing it, but it is just about bringing in those small incremental changes. I mean,
That's right.
Atomic Habits, James, whatever his name is, he
Yes.
talks about it all
James
the
Clear.
time. It's like little
Yeah.
things that
Yeah.
will actually make a difference. Yeah, James Clear, that's his name. Thank you.
Yeah.
So in terms of business, you must have also had challenges in the
Yes.
business
Yeah.
around, because going from 2 people to 130 staff is huge. Was it all plain sailing or really easy?
No, it's actually kind of funny because I mentioned I got hired on to this company, and that's when I met, my
Mm,
soon to, who would ultimately become my business partner, but also really a mentor of mine. And he was a joint venture partner with a competing brand. Like ultimately, it became our
right.
competition later, but at that time, he
Oh,
was a joint venture partner in our trade market. So he basically had the rights to our province. For those in the
mm,
States, it's like your state. Like he had that rights, that territorial rights. So any stores that would open or any commercial B2B type enterprises that would be initiated, it would be him that would be overseeing that and sharing with his partners. And, things were all good until they weren't. And him and his partners, let's just say they had a falling out and there
right.
was a divorce and they agreed to
Yep.
disagree. He ultimately left. He had a couple existing stores, just a couple. There was 2 stores specifically that wanted to keep. They took over everything. Like they literally took everything. All we ended up having was just that inventory because they had control of the bank accounts and all the assets, except we had these 2 brick and mortar locations.
Mm,
And so during this transition, actually, a lot of us that worked for the company were offered money not to show up because they were trying to sabotage him. They were trying to basically pressure him out to sell.
right.
And he'd already been doing this for a long time. And he's like, I'm not getting out of this industry. I got kids that are just growing up and they're going to have to go to university. I'm not ready to just, hang it up. And
Yep.
I remember him asking me, he's like, well, hey, I was his number one guy. I had the relationship with him, not with his partners that were out in Ontario, so way out east, another part of the country that really had no
Hmm.
relationship with us other than on our pay stubs. And I was given an opportunity. I was given an opportunity to
Yep.
basically be given, what I sort of warmly relate to being the golden handcuffs later. But I was
Yes.
given a great equity position because he knew I had 20 years as junior, had the energy, the fortitude, but also the skill set to be really mentored into being a replica of him, and even
Yep.
then some. because I had a lot of different views. I'm much better with computers. And then when marketing came around, like I was more in tune with all that. And
Mm.
so that's what started off. And obviously, as we're scaling, as we're trying to grow, there was a lot of hurdles we had to get over, like establishing new relationships with new suppliers, because those existing brands were going to stay with the national company, didn't want to go off with just some little 2-store company, in fear of losing that overall volume. So we had to regain those relationships over time by just doing what we do and doing it really well. And that was serving a customer base, helping them with their needs, getting them a great product, a great experience, but ultimately helping them get their health and wellness results. Because if they get the results, everybody asks them, what have you been doing? Well, actually, I bought some equipment from Fitness Town just down the street. You should go check it out. Talk to Dai or talk to James or talk to one of the guys. They'll help you out. And so that word of mouth referral was just tremendous. And then, as social media came about, I took an active interest in that, both personally and professionally. Decided I want to learn it. I remember reading Gary Vaynerchuk's first printing of his book, Crush It. I remember reading it on the plane going to Ontario, literally go visit my mom. And I was like, wow, this is a game changer. This is where everything's going. And at that time we were advertising in the media, like on print, on radio, on TV, and sponsoring events. And we still would do events. They were great. But those other 3 traditional medias, they were diminishing returns year after year. We were spending more and getting less. And yet on social, I was just doing all this stuff organically through storytelling, through sharing, stories of clients and their successes, and just having fun with developing relationships online. And our business just kept growing. But there's hiccups, there was like 2008, a little bit of an economic crash, right? That affected our retail sales. Discretionary dollars. Fitness equipment is discretionary. Come on, let's be real.
Definitely.
You're worried about losing your house, you're not going to go buy a treadmill, and so we had to sort of navigate some of those economic ups and downs, but we were resilient. We were able to get through it. And when I left the business, it wasn't a great time to leave. I didn't get like a huge check or an exit, but I had enough that it gave us some space to do a couple things and basically lean into the things that I wanted to start doing, which was supporting people really in the one-on-one, doing more speaking, offering digital online solutions for people and consulting, like something that gave me a lot more flexibility with time and place. And that's what I transitioned to that I've been doing the last 8 years,
I think what's really interesting about that story is, I think that great leaders are always reading and always educating themselves and always, seeing what's really going on, because it's very, very easy, again, when you get really busy with business and you've got all this stuff going on, good and bad, making time to actually read, making time to do research. If you don't do that, you can get left behind. I mean, obviously reading Gary's book, was an eye opener. There would have been other businesses in the same industry that didn't read, that didn't kind of pick up on that, and may have gone way too long still doing traditional media and not building up that social media presence and the online presence. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, very well said. It's and even today, like, and I think that I know a lot about that stuff, but I really know very little. Because it's changing so quickly, and now with this,
so rapidly,
with ChatGPT and all the AI functionality, I'm like, whoa, whoa, it's hard to keep up with all that stuff. And I think, this is one thing to take note on is, I remember one piece of advice that we were given was this idea that, there's often people in your organization that might be younger, maybe don't have the life experiences or the work experience of some of their senior associates and partners, but they themselves have grown up with access to technology and they don't know a world without it. And often to them, it's just normal. And so we were starting to allow a lot more input from those younger people that we were bringing on, into our marketing, into what we were doing in the stores and outside of the stores. And that was really valuable, like from a company, but also a culture standpoint within the organization, because now people felt like they had a voice, and it didn't matter how long you had been there and how old you are and what you'd done in your life. Like, it was just, everyone had an opinion, and we would weigh out the opinion and discuss it. And it would influence a lot of the direction that we went. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but you know what? It was good because we were all going the same direction, and I think that was the critical piece, is allowing people on your team that are good at doing what they do and like doing what they do, well, give them the space
Yep.
to do it. You know?
Yeah. We call it delegate and elevate, and it's really about letting people, elevate themselves up to their unique ability, where they add the most value. And so that's the stuff that they love doing and they're great at doing, is usually where they add the most value to the business too. But I think you've made a really valid point. I think sometimes, particularly for us oldies, kind of thinking about letting the young ones kind of get control of things. But this is native for them. They've grown up with this. My niece, who's just about to turn 16. I mean, when you watch her with technology, she's always got earbuds in. She's always listening to something. There's multiple things going on around her, and I kind of go, how do you concentrate? But actually she does, and she's very, very smart, and she passes all of her exams, and so you can't critique her, because she's actually doing very, very well. But it's a different way of living, and they have been brought up with it from a baby, effectively.
That's right. It's so true.
Yeah,
it's like they won't know a world without it, and if they do know a world without it, we've got bigger problems to worry about. So it's like, okay, it's here to stay. And it's amazing what the youth can do today. That I just think back to when I was that morbidly obese teen. I was like, oh, and I'm serious. I'm very grateful the internet wasn't what it is today. Media. It's like, wow, that social pressure that they deal with is just immense.
I'm actually a trustee on the Life Education Trust, which is a trust that kind of helps kids be the best version of themselves. So it deals with all kinds of things. It deals with the drug issues. It deals with the alcohol issues. It deals with education around food and fitness. And it's basically Harold the giraffe is actually their mascot. And the reason why they chose a giraffe was that you're always looking up looking up, rather as opposed to being worried about what others are thinking of you. So yeah, it's really interesting, because obviously we're bringing in programs now around online bullying and around all the stuff that goes on. And I tell you what, we had a great speaker the other day who talked about some of the dangers of kids having access to the internet, and he was very, very strict about not letting his kids have a phone in their bedroom or any technology in their bedroom. And he started to share some of the stuff that they have access to, and I have to say, I thought I was open-minded. My mind was blown. It was like, wow, okay, so it's a different world, but it is what it is. We can't change it. We have to work with it.
True. And was those conversations captured, like that presentation? Is that something that's like available in the ether, the online ether? I would love to hear that or see that.
Yes, they actually did a really interesting project where they I'll find the details and put it in the link from the podcast. I can't remember exactly what it is, but they basically got this. They pretended to be a young female online and put her across all the social platforms, but it was actually being run by an older lady.
Yes.
And it was and they actually monitored, how quickly this young lady, young girl, was contacted by older people, the kind of things they were asked for, the sort of the scams that they get drawn into, because it's very, they'll go, oh, just send me a nude photo. They send a nude photo. Now they've got ammunition to actually hold them to ransom for a whole lot more. It's like, it's fascinating. The documentary is actually really, really interesting.
Wow.
But we're getting a bit off topic.
As a father of two daughters, I'll tell you, that
changed.
scares the crap out of me. It really does.
I know. And so what was really interesting was, and I love talking about boundaries in business as well. Like, people need to know what the boundaries are. We as humans, we actually quite like boundaries. Yes. And he had what would be considered fairly fairly strict ones, which is there's no technology in the bedroom on your own. If you want to use a phone or a computer, you do it out in the open where everybody in the family can see it. And at first I thought, gosh, that's draconian. What is wrong with this guy? And then after hearing the presentation, seeing the documentary, it's like, actually, I think that's not such a bad idea. And he said, look, sometimes my kids hate me. They get really stuck into me. You're being restrictive. You don't understand what it's like. And he's like, yeah, I'm okay with that, because I know what the other side is. Yeah. And I think back to my parents, and I don't know. You talked about, I'm a bit older, but my parents also were in that era when nobody ever got divorced. They stayed together. I'm not entirely sure they should have stayed together. There were times when you kind of went, I think they were staying together because they felt they had to, rather than they really enjoyed each other's company. Right. But one thing I will say is they were bloody good parents. I mean, they were very, very strict, and I hated them for it. But gosh, I am so grateful for them these days. It's like, the things I learned from them around values, around morals, very, very grateful.
We're fortunate that way, because I love that you're saying that, because I also think it's important for us to remember and reframe sort of those histories that we've had, because as much as it was such a brief period as kids that we actually had in our whole scope of life, it's such a small period, right? But it's amazing when you sort of think back to that emotions that we dealt with, as teens, right? Like I know I keep reading studies that talk about, girls and like youth brains aren't fully developed till they're like 25. I'm like, well, that actually
Yeah.
explains a lot, because in my early 20s, I was still just immature and doing stupid things, and that's
Yes.
why. Okay, I still don't think my brain's
So
matured, but I'm working on it. So
my husband often reverts to being 7. It's all good.
yeah.
But it's interesting. Trevor Grice, who actually founded the Life Education Trust, he did a whole lot of research on the brain and how the brain works. And it actually men or boys develop take a lot longer to develop as well.
Really?
So that
Okay.
frontal lobe part of it, yeah. So 25 years before they're actually full. And if you start using any drugs or alcohol before that brain is fully formed, it can have an impact long term on you as well. So it's really important that. And yeah, if you think about it, I mean, gosh, I don't know about you. I mean, at 17, I was starting to rebel against my parents. I was doing things I probably shouldn't have been doing, and all the way through my early 20s, and probably didn't really settle down until I got married. And then even then, I'd say there was some moments there where I hadn't really quite settled down. But that's the time when we're the formative years that we shouldn't be putting stuff into our body, but we do. But yeah, anyway.
It's wild, right? I know it's always that sort of hindsight. It's not always 2020, but it sure could be if we let it. Oh, well.
I mean, I do think that, though, and the same goes with business, right? I think that actually sometimes the mistakes that we make give us much greater lessons than the successes that we have. Well because, and this is why part of the reason I started this podcast is I think that we see lots of success stories out there. And don't get me wrong, I love success and I love celebrating success. But there's also, I think a lot of us learn more from our mistakes on the way than we necessarily do from the successes. And certainly that's been my story. Yeah.
That's well said.
Gosh, yeah. So what are you doing now? You said, so you had this kind of epiphany. This no longer was for you. You're doing the talking. You're doing the one-on-one coaching. You're doing the online stuff. What is the kind of person that you love to work with? What's your ideal person?
Well, I like people that perform at high levels in areas of their life. And when I say that, like professionally, especially, like people that are really just, I mean, it takes a lot of grit to be an entrepreneur. And resilience. Like it just does. It's not smooth sailing. I mean, talk to anybody with a startup, they'll tell you. It's like, I mean, I'm part of a startup now as a fractional CRO, and I'm like, wow, I forgot what it's like to be doing this stuff. And I'm like, wow, it is like every day, right? Putting on the boxing gloves, stepping in the ring, and let's go another round, like it's and you have to have that grit to just keep doing it and be okay with the big no's that you continuously get. Right. And
the knockdowns.
And so, I like connecting with people like that because I know that they already have a certain ability to do hard things, things that are going to make them feel uncomfortable, because that is one thing we have to get somewhat comfortable with. Okay. If we want to navigate any significant changes in our life, like any changes that we navigate, it's rarely easy, but it's almost always worth it. But when you're going through change, it's like awful. Sometimes it is. It's just awful, right? Like it's like you can't see, 3 inches in front of your face, but then you get through the change, or you get over that first big hump, and you turn around and you look at where you've come from, and you realize, you know what? Now looking back on it, it actually wasn't that bad. But it's just that perspective shift, and so I find that people that are working really well professionally sometimes are underperforming or feel sheepish in their personal life. So they will retreat and do more in their professional. Do you know what I mean? Like they'll just take whatever time they would have, and they become workaholics. They become obsessive with just working in their business, and it creates this lack of harmony between personal life and professional life. Because it's all about harmony. It's you and I had a great conversation before we started today. Talking about this idea of balance, right? And it's like, well, if you think about balance, like a teeter-totter, you've got the weight over here on this end. And, well, I'm shifting my attention to where the weight's down. Oh, now I want to get the other end up. Okay, I'm going to turn my attention to the other side. Oh, inevitably it goes down. And it's like, I can't keep my eyes on two different separate places at the same time. So it's not about trying to balance them. It's about how do you get them to work together to create the greatest amount of fulfillment, joy, and happiness, And I think that is the person I love connecting with most, is the one that's struggling with that harmony. And because I love helping them find it.
Yeah. And I love you said it's not easy, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate, very grateful to have gone and done Outward Bound, which I'm not sure if you have in Canada.
Yes.
But it
Yeah.
is,
It's
yes, you
amazing.
do. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was 43 years old, I think, at the time, probably the
Wow.
oldest, fattest person on the course.
Ah,
But I did it. And after
good
I'd
for
finished
you.
doing it, they actually asked, would you like to sponsor a brick? They have this walkway of bricks that have little messages on them and
Oh,
sponsors' names. And I didn't want my name on it because it wasn't that for me. But I actually literally had stamped onto the brick, "It's not easy, but it's worth it," because that was my
oh,
takeout from Outward Bound. So
no way.
that's
That's so
hilarious.
cool. I
Yeah.
love it because it's true,
Um,
though. It's
yeah.
so true. What a
Yeah.
great thing to put on
I
a
mean,
brick.
I had to run 12 kilometers on the last day of Outward Bound, and I'm A, I'm not built to run. B, I say overweight and certainly not fit. But there was no, I learned that you could do it if you put your mind to it. You absolutely could do it. I could do anything I wanted to, and that was the biggest takeaway that
So
I took away from
cool.
Outward Bound is that
Good for
yeah,
you.
still not all that great at climbing rocks, sheer rock
Yeah,
faces, but I
right.
did it.
I don't think we're meant to do that. That's all good.
So it's called it's all called pushing the boundaries, isn't it? Okay, brilliant. So I'm now going to ask you, because I always ask everybody, top 3 tips or tools for these people, because I'm sure a lot of people listening in are very, very high performing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, I'm speaking from personal experience, we do struggle.
Yes.
Where things go bad, you focus more on the other, and then you get out of whack. So what are your top kind of 3 tips or tools?
Okay. 3 questions. And these
Oh,
are the
yeah.
3 questions everyone needs to commit to memory whenever they're feeling that sort of inkling that there's a change on the horizon, and maybe you want to be more proactive in that change in your life, rather than feeling like you're reacting to change in your life. I always say it's like Indiana Jones, right? Remember in Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's that big boulder chasing him down the pathway. Well, I think that's a metaphor for change, right? Like we're Indiana Jones. The boulder is change, right? And we're run. But all joking aside, these 3 questions I find to be very instrumental and helpful and clarifying for those that want to navigate change. It doesn't matter how small or how significant. And the first question is, can I do it? Can I do, and it being the change, right?
Yeah.
Second question, if I do it, will it work? Like, really, will it work?
Yep.
And then the third question is it worth it? And, if I'm talking to a team or an organization, a company, sure, I can say, is it worth it? And we're talking in general terms as a group. But when I'm talking to individuals, you have to frame it, am I worth it? Am I worth the change? That first one, really, it's all about the confidence, right? Like, can I do this? Can I actually make the change? Like at 15 years old, I want to get healthy. I'm morbidly obese. I'd never played sports. I was the kid that would pretend he was sick so I didn't have to go to phys ed class, physical education. Like I was very good at not doing anything. And, when I decided to make the change and I'm like, I want to get healthy. And I'm like, can I get healthy? And I'm like, well, I'm 15 years old. I'm capable. I can do stuff. I can move my body. I'm sure I can do this. And then the second question is like, okay, well, if I do actually do this and I start, say, moving my body with a little bit of purpose, this idea, intentional weight release rather than just simply going through the motions. But if I do that, will it actually work? And then for me, it was like getting magazines and getting books from the library and looking at success stories of other people that had done it. And I'm like, well, if it worked for them, it's going to work for me. So if I do the same stuff, do you think it'll work? Yeah, I think it will. So I've got a yes and a yes now. My confidence starts to go up. When you feel confident and clear, you make more decisive action and you procrastinate less. and the third question, am I worth it? There was days where I didn't feel that way. But that was the days that I would make sure I got around a positive community. I also made sure I had my family and those that cared for me unconditionally around me. Because if I ever felt like I wasn't worth it, they were there to remind me that I was. And to support me. But those 3 questions, I don't care what kind of change you're navigating, they're going to help. They're going to help. Yeah, and when you get clear, you get confident. When you get confident, you take action. And those are what I would like to offer people today.
Oh, that is absolutely fantastic. I absolutely love it. Okay, so can I do it? If I do it, will it work? And is it worth it, or am I worth it if it's a
Yeah.
personal decision you're
Yeah.
making? Brilliant. Hey, look, we've covered off so much more on this podcast as well. So many little tips and tools, but that is a great way to finish off. Hey, Dai, if anybody wants to get in contact with you and would like to, work with you or look at your online courses, whatever they want to do, engage with you as a speaker, how do they find you?
Well, this cool thing about having a unique name, I'm pretty easy to find if you can spell it right.
Yes, that's true.
And I am very active on Instagram and Facebook. But I also recognize that a lot of the people I work with aren't on social, but they are on LinkedIn. And as such, I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. So I always say, reach out. It's a wonderful place for us to start a conversation. And we'll talk about change. We'll talk about what's got you excited and what's holding you back from realizing the excitement, And I just got to say, Debra, thank you. It's amazing that you create this platform to share these conversations with not only your audiences, but the world, because we all benefit from this. We all do.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you. Thank you. Really.
Oh, no, look, thank you. As I said to a lot of my guests, I love doing these because I sit here and I take copious notes. All this stuff is being absorbed. And it just reminds me as well, because, I think I like to think that I'm doing most of the right things, but we all get distracted. We all kind of end up losing track of things. And so it's always a really great reminder. And plus, I get to meet awesome people. So now I know next time I come to Vancouver, I can go, Dai, I'm here.
Yes,
can we catch up for a kombucha?
I'm going to be counting on it. So when you get here, you better be saying we're coming, because there's some great restaurants, there's some great walks. We'll have some fun. It'll be wonderful. Yeah, no, I came over to Toronto earlier on this year. That was my first time ever in Canada. Wow. But I heard amazing things about Vancouver, and I just didn't have a chance to do it. So next time. I'll be there for sure. Hey, look, Dai, I really appreciate it. I know you've been like super vulnerable. I really appreciate that. I appreciate everything that you shared with me, and just thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you, Debra. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the podcast show, Better Business, Better Life. My name is Debra Chantry-Taylor. I'm an EOS implementer, family business advisor, business and leadership coach, podcaster, and speaker. However, I'm also a business owner with several current business interests. I'm fortunate to have lived the high life with all the lifestyle, the toys, you name it, and then I've lost it all, not only once, but twice in 2 spectacular train wrecks. I know what it's like to experience the highs and lows. I came across EOS when they launched into New Zealand using my Entrepreneurs Playground and Event Centre in Parnell, Auckland. I love the simplicity of the tools, and their philosophies fitted my personal brand statement perfectly. The brilliance is in the simplicity. I've always been passionate about seeing entrepreneurs lead a life they love, and now I help them live that EOS life. Doing what they love, with people they love, making a huge difference in the world, being compensated appropriately, and with time to pursue other passions. If you want more information or want to get in contact about using EOS in your business, you can visit my website at debra.coach. That's www.debra.coach. Thanks for listening.